Can you describe what you have done so far in front of the FAO headquarters in Mumbai now?
So right now we are practically stationed right in front of the POW building. There's really a huge problem of food in their country, and that's why we are here.
Stop land grabbing! Stop land grabbing!
It's been a really drastic situation. So in IPTK, we firstly worked with food sovereignty in these places.
What has happened in the United States is a good example of what can happen in the rest of the world if we follow the system.
So what is digital agriculture? Steal the data of farmers. Does a Bill Gates know how to farm? No. Does a Microsoft know how to farm? No, they know nothing. But they track the farmer, and Gates was placing in farmers' homes in Andhra Pradesh.
We have to also take into account that in family farming, most farmers are women. They may be invisible, but the majority of the agricultural production in this country is done by women.
They have to cut forest and damaging the biodiversity and putting out from their territories our sisters and brothers from indigenous communities.
That despite the lockdown and also travel restriction, the corporate does not stop. They continue with their project, with their plantation, with their mining, continue to take away our resources.
Those who receive food allowance still struggle to around the healthy or nutrition foods. Price of food in Hong Kong, whether in market or supermarket, are very expensive and continue to increase.
The Palestinian people are mainly deprived of having agricultural inputs, seeds, seedlings, and even water security. Water security being one of the main problems that the brothers in Syria suffer from, our brethren in the occupied territories suffer.
Since the rural peasants movement in Venezuela, we have been organizing our peoples, our communities, to see how we can produce and how we can manage our own food production.
Ito po yung maliit na lupang sinasaka namin. Sa ngayon po ay 2,500 square meters na lang, o katumbas ng 1/4.
Failed, to increase the incomes of smallholder farmers. It has failed by, polluting and contaminating the environment.
Negotiation should be focused the betterment of the small-scale fisheries.
Where I just participated in an action to protest the Gates Foundation and their Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa.
Ang nagugutom sa buong mundo. Ang kagutuman ay dahil sa kontrol ng mga malalaking kapitalista.
Hi, everyone. We're now in the webinar on transforming food systems through people-led agroecology. And this is part of the Global People Summit side event, online side event. As we know, on September 23rd, that's tomorrow, we will have, the UN will have a food system summit. And it will steer the world towards a truly, that's what they claim, a truly radical transformation of food systems. But the reality is that big corporations with their profit agenda are running the UN FSS. Thus, its outcomes could only be expected to further legitimize and perpetuate the same flawed policies and programs on food anchored on neoliberalism and harmful technologies. We believe, and that's why we are having this webinar today. We believe that agroecology provides a viable pathway to address the food security and the needs of the people amid the multiple global crises of health, the pandemic, climate, environmental, and economic crisis. So it's been quite a decade in the 2020 decade, and now we are still suffering from the pandemic and all the crises. So we have the food and agriculture, which actually recognize the 10 elements of agroecology. And unfortunately, during the pre-summit of the UNFSS, it was not really taken up very seriously by the UNFSS. And we have now what you call alliance, a toxic alliance between FAO and CropLife, and we know who CropLife is. CropLife, is basically a group of pesticide companies, and they are the members, and they control CropLife. So the alliance between FAO and CropLife is a major problem because they will promote the industrial agriculture and huge amounts of pesticides, GMOs, commercial seeds, and it will be far away from agroecology. So therefore, we are calling for the People's Summit, and the Global People's Summit is for just, equitable, healthy, and sustainable food systems. And it aims to challenge and expose the UNFSS and advance people's actions for a truly radical food system transformation. For the GPS, agroecology is one of the key pillars of transformation, along with food sovereignty, safe, adequate, healthy, and nutritious food that is also culturally appropriate, because we know that when food aid comes, it's bread for Africa or bread for wheat for Southeast Asia, which is something that, not a very key staple of Asia or Africa. Anyway, so we are calling for this, and the peasant right to land and resources, very key element of this, because without land, without resources, without the territories of the indigenous people, they are unable to control and feed themselves, their communities, and their nation. So that's one of the key elements that we wanted to discuss here. And so Pan-Asia Pacific, MASIPAG, and Pan-North America are co-organizing this webinar on agroecology, and we're calling it Transforming Food Systems Through People-Led Agroecology. And it aims to reaffirm the basic principles of agroecology from the perspective of small food producers and rural communities. It will basically provide updates on key global discussions related to agroecology and to identify challenges and potential areas of advocacy or campaigning. It will also highlight inspiring stories and best practices from India, Pakistan, Africa, and New Zealand. And we will have communities sharing to advance agroecology. And we will, at the end of it, propose initial action plans for food system transformation from the lens of agroecology practitioners and advocates as a contribution to GPS. So, so I'm opening the session, and I would like to say that it's really great to have our wonderful speakers who have a lot of knowledge and wisdom, and our community leaders who are actually practicing agroecology and making it work on the ground with the communities, and all the sharing that goes on. It's amazing. So I am really happy to be facilitating this session, and happy to have this wonderful opportunity to call upon the first speaker, Tito Medina, who used to be the chair of MASIPAG, and he was the coordinator of MASIPAG, and a very good facilitator of the MASIPAG process, moving towards farmer seed breeding and towards agroecology. First, it started with rice, and then now it's all the crops that is needed for a nutritious food, nutritious well-being of a person and the community and the nation. So, Dr. Chito, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Saro, for that very generous introduction. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone in this webinar. I will be sharing to you a topic entitled Defining People-Led Agroecology and the Importance of Movement Building. Next, please. Before I proceed further, to contextualize our food systems, about 1.5 billion small-scale farmers and another similar number, about 1.5 billion also, of range of small-scale activities, urban gardeners, pastoralists, hunter-gatherers, livestock keepers, fishers, forest keepers, indigenous people. They produce at least 70% of the world's food. That means the majority of world of humanity actually are coming from small-scale farmers. And 85% of small-scale farmers actually have 2 hectares or less of all the farmers. Majority are small-scale. And in this context, under this globalized food system, the net flow of food is from areas of poverty to areas of wealth and abundance. So you can see problems about the situation at the moment when it comes to food and agriculture. Next slide. Okay, so there are contradictions to these current food systems because of the corporate control of food and agriculture, over-centralized, globalized. One is that food producers stay hungry. Second contradiction is food kills people because of different combinations of nutrients and vitamins to the needs of the human body, as well as other contaminants of additional processing inputs. Food is increasingly not for humans because many are grown for biofuels, for feeds of livestock and other things. So the food growing is displaced by other crops for different purposes. Food is wasted because they're not in the hands of the hungry, they're not in the hands of the poor. So these are the problems. Next slide. But let me share to you that around 2005 to 2007, there was an assessment of agricultural science and technology over the past 50 years, and they were looking at what should be the agriculture in the next 50 years. Fortunately, I was involved into the design as well into the assessment and writing of this exercise, sponsored by many national agents, many UN agencies, including the World Bank. But this is one of the first assessments of agriculture that is more pro small-scale farmers. Some of the highlights of the findings was saying that marginalization of small-scale farmers is no longer tenable, and business as usual chemical farming is no longer an option. We need radical change in agriculture, in policy as well as in practice. So you can see it's a different formulation, and this is pro people, pro poor, and this is more of justice. The other recommendations was saying there's a need for systematic redirection of funding, research policy towards the need to be small-scale farmers, and biodiversity-based agriculture is beneficial to poor farmers. it goes also saying that traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge, IK, should be incorporated, should be tapped and incorporated in partnership with formal science and technology. So this assessment, however, was shelved afterwards by FAO because after some time, the corporate lobby also made a suggestion and they made their own assessment. And because this is against corporate interests, perhaps there was not much effort to push this forward for the benefit of justice, for the benefit of food sovereignty, for the benefit of the poor and the hungry. Okay, so the prevailing system of agriculture is and food is a corporate control, chemical farming, wherein seeds, chemicals, GMOs, and patents are all needed, are all there playing for the raking in of huge profits for the corporations. And this farming needs so much capital, and they are influenced by international policies and translated into national policies, neoliberal policies like WTO, free trade agreements, TRIPS, agreement on agriculture, etc., and with government influences and international funding institutions. In this situation, which is creates lots of insecurity in food, poverty, and hunger, we need to transform this, and that's why the introduction of Charo a while ago was we are trying to push agroecology, agroecology towards food sovereignty as our desired system to attain food justice, human justice, and sustainability and equity, feeding the poor and the hungry. Next slide. Agroecology, however, has been there for about 30 years already, at least 30 years, and it has evolved a little bit, but still, even us perhaps among here in this Zoom webinar, might have different thinking. But I think the best outline that was has been produced by SIDSE, Cooperation International for Development and Solidarity, that they highlighted dimensions of about the agroecology. Beforehand, most of farming, most of agroecology are only environmental or technological dimension. Sustainable agriculture, organic agriculture, mostly are only technological in dimension. We wanted to incorporate economic dimension, sociocultural dimensions, and especially, most especially, political dimensions. The FAO, or Food and Agriculture Organization, have also a version of agroecology, but it lacks political dimension. That's why we have to be sure, we have to agree among ourselves that in our agroecology, we need this broader context, we need especially political dimension and the interactions of these dimensions, for example, political ecology, political economy of the agriculture and food. Next slide. The characteristics of a people-led agroecology, well, the environmental, everyone is aware of that, or very, they're doing it. All of us perhaps are doing it. So these are guided by broader framework or context of sustainability, resiliency, synergy of inputs, diversity, efficiency, healthy soil, so that the healthy soil can have healthy food, and the healthy food can be translated into healthy humans. So environmental is much practiced among us and others, but we need to look at the economic dimension of this, because many farmers are not getting enough income to support themselves. So it could support all the needs of the family. The farmers should need the own inputs, diverse income. The farmers should set the prices, distribution webs, not distribution food chain from the corporations to the consumers, but it should be distribution food webs. And local markets is the more important thing about this, to ensure local food security. And this kind of agroecology could contribute to economic growth of the locality as well as a nation. In the sociocultural, of course, it has to be ensuring healthy diet from the farmers. There should be farmers research and they should be sharing knowledge between one and another. There should be cooperation, not competition. And farmers, consumers linkages should be established. And there should be solidarity among people, not, again, as I said, not competition. In the political side, this again defines our people-led agroecology as different from many. The biggest defense here is it must be people organized, empowered people to decide for themselves. There should be collective and participatory governance among themselves, by and among themselves. Agriculture should be in the hands of the people, not in the hands of the corporations. And social movements should be alive in order to fight and stand for the needs of a just production system and food system in favor of the poor and the farmers. Next slide. In transforming food systems into people-led agroecology, well, it can be variable, but the elements, important elements, basic ingredients is that the first level we need to organize farmers or farmers organize themselves in order to for the organization to be defining the common objective of the community among the poor people, conscientize them and to as a basis for action. Then level 2 is then they're going to the practices of ecological farming to develop alternative practices to chemical farming. And organic system is a system that can be an alternative if it's only about the technical aspect. They have to redesign the bigger agro ecosystem on the basis of ecological processes. And then establish direct connections between the farmers and consumers. This is at the market level. Farmers, local markets, solidarity markets, consumer-supported agriculture, and other approaches in marketing. But most importantly, at the highest level of this is that we need to build movements that this movement to assert an alternative global food system, fighting the corporate agricultural and food system. And this movement fighting for agroecology, it should be based on equity, participation of farmers, democracy, and justice that is not only sustainable, but helps restore and protects the Earth's life support systems. Next slide. Because agroecology is fighting for equity, inclusion, and justice, among other things, it is complex. And therefore, we need to have more complex approaches, more diverse linkages, and diverse approaches in order to be more successful in our advocacy and in our fight and to instill agroecology. Next slide. So that in the advocacy, usually many people would say, the so-called lone rangers, sometimes of course even us organizations are saying no, no to corporate control, stop corporate control on food and agriculture. But saying no or stop is not enough. The problems and the perpetrators also are so powerful. These transnational corporations have in their own disposal and command lots of resources in order to control agriculture and food, marketing, and everything. So that we need to build movements. From organizations, we need to build coalitions. But from these organizations and coalitions, we need to build movements. A movement to instill and fight for agroecology in favor for justice of all people and equity and justice on earth. Next slide. Let me show you a little bit on the categories of activities from lone wolf into mobilizing, into organizing. These are important components, but it should evolve into bigger activity. That's why we call it movement building that would be in favor of transformative change in culture, society, and politics. In our case, starting from agroecology, so that this movement building an agroecology builds power that shifts society into more justice and more equity, building transformational partnerships with other social justice organizations. Next slide. So we have to move from coalitions to movements. Coalition is, as a small review or a reflection, is an organization of organizations, as if sometimes you feel it is already big. And these are together for a goal, for the power to do the things that cannot be done through one organization alone. But still, as I have been saying, that the coalitions can still evolve into higher, bigger group of people and bigger objectives, bigger goals, and we have to evolve movements. That this our movement and agroecology being organized set of constituents, coalitions and alliances, bringing together strength and resources to create a more powerful voice through collective action in pursuing a common agenda of change, that is change from corporate farming and corporate centered food into agroecology. Let me mention a little bit that we need in movement building, we have to build common agenda and agroecology. It has to be participatory. It should not be dominated by just one or a few individuals or organizations. It should be participatory among all the constituents and active and actors. Unity in diversity. We don't expect any unified on everything, but we have to find a common ground so that we work on this common ground and the agroecology. And we also need distributive leadership. These are just reminders for us and in building movements. Next slide. So as Mahatma Gandhi has said, be the change you want to see in the world, meaning we can not only be shouting what we want, we have to do all the actions also. We have to do the change, invoke the change and make the change happen with partnerships and movements with other actors, individuals, organizations, alliances, and other things to be a movement, and so that we can make a change. Because as I said, our opposite power of corporations are so powerful because they command, as I said, a huge amount of monetary or financial resources. And so we need bigger actions and coordination through movements. Next slide. Finally, the key to replace the dominant corporate food systems and to mainstream wide-scale and globalized agroecology is in our hands, actually. The choice and action is ours. No one is stopping us, and the time is now. And so I challenge everyone to go more, do more in terms of linkaging, in terms of actions, in terms of fighting the corporate actors so that we can mainstream agroecology in favor of justice and peace, and for the hungry, for the poor, and for everyone, for the farmers, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tito. I think what you said was, it resonates. I think if you look at the 3 billion, you said, 1.5 billion of farmers and 1.5 billion of gardeners. It's actually 3 billion, farmers and workers who have been working the land to feed us all. So I think that's amazing that so many of our farmers are still there and feeding us. And I think the figure is still low compared to, because it doesn't include pastoralists, fisherfolk, and others, so dairy farmers, etc. And I think also what you said, only 2 hectares, 85% of these farmers only have 2% hectares of land, and or less. So it's really a struggle for land and resources, actually, for small food producers and for workers and small food others.
And many are landless. And many are landless.
Yes, many are
Thank you.
landless. Exactly. And then I think also what you had highlighted as solidarity markets, I really like that idea. We always talk about local markets, and I think that's what is needed. And I think the solidarity markets go beyond local markets. So I like the idea, and and we should work on towards this. Finally, you said that let's resist corporate control, and that's not enough. We need to build movements. I think that ended in a very important aspect, that organize and then come together and build coalitions and then build movements. And I think MASIPAG is a very good example of that movement. So is the Asian Peasants Coalition and many other movements that we are all part of. So thank you very much, Dr. Chito. Our next speaker is Marsha Ishi Eidman, and she's from PAN North America. And Marsha, I know Marsha for many years, and one thing that stays with me every time I think of Marsha is when we were in Cuba together, and she said, "Oh, I need to go to the rice fields." And she went to the rice fields. She was checking all the pests and predators and the beneficials, and it was so exciting to see her do that. So thank you, Marsha, for your passion for these issues, for agroecology, to support agroecology and to resist corporate control of food and agriculture. So thank you very much. And Marsha will be talking and critiquing some of the CFS Committee on Food Security policy recommendations on agroecology and the broader policy issues at the global level. Thank you, Marsha.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that. And I have very fond memories of our time together in Cuba and in Senegal and Malaysia at all the PAN international conferences we've been at together. So I am going to share my screen now. Hopefully this works for you, for everyone. Can someone let me know if you can see it all right?
Yes, Marsha.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Well, as we heard from Dr. Chito, agroecology is clearly on the rise as a powerful movement. Just last year, the PAN Agroecology Work Group hosted a webinar featuring the experiences of farmers in our network who have transitioned already from chemical intensive farming. Amazing stories. You can find the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel on our agroecology playlist right here. So definitely things are happening in the field. What is the role for our governments? Well, we just hosted another webinar a month or two ago, highlighting some of the real progress that is happening on policy and political levels. A recording of that one will soon be available in the same place. But what we learned from that is that we are seeing that where social movements are strong and where people are able to hold their governments accountable, public policy starts to catch up. So I'll give you a few examples from these stories and then an update on what is happening in the global policy arena. At the local level, as a municipality, the people of Valencia, Spain have developed an innovative democratic food council that has brought together farmers, consumers, schools, researchers, public administrators, and the private sector, some of the local markets, in a collective and deeply participatory effort to accomplish an agroecological transition in the city that actually engages producers in the broader territory beyond as well. It's very exciting work there. At the provincial level, the Ministry of Family Agriculture in Misiones, Argentina, is supporting the food sovereignty objectives of its 30,000 farm families. And over the years, the government there has enacted a series of laws and initiatives, all with an agroecological focus, such as this 2014 law for the promotion of agroecological production. And there's quite a few more laws and initiatives they've implemented. At the national level, Under the leadership of President Obrador, Mexico has embarked on a transition plan, nationwide transition plan for agroecological production that aims to transform their food system to one based in agroecology, good health, food sovereignty, and cooperative practices. And then we have at the regional level, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, has launched an initiative across all the 15 countries of West Africa to move the region towards ecological organic agriculture. And this, of course, builds on the deep knowledge and leadership of African peasants and networks such as the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa and organizations on the ground like our partner OBEPAB in Benin. So much is happening. So now we come to the global stage. And there is a lot happening in various UN spaces. I will just focus on developments at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, and the UN-hosted Committee on World Food Security. But there are opportunities to promote agroecology at the CBD, climate change, all those other places as well. So FAO, okay, a few years ago, FAO began a rather remarkable shift away from its decades of adherence to Green Revolution ideology and technologies. Under the Brazilian Director General, Graziano da Silva, FAO began to respond to the scientific evidence of agroecology and the strong social movement calls for FAO to reorient towards agroecology. Accordingly, FAO launched a series of global and regional symposia on agroecology that PAN attended, published papers on how to transition towards agroecology, launched its Scaling Up of Agroecology initiative, and a lot more. So there is quite a lot of strong momentum a few years back. Well, what happened? What happened is that we had a new Director General from China, Qiu Dongqiu, replace Da Silva in 2019. And shortly thereafter, suddenly FAO is proudly announcing that it had signed this partnership agreement with CropLife International, as we heard, the global association of some of the world's biggest pesticide companies. During this time, senior officers with decades of experience in agroecology at FAO had been pushed out, and a new business-friendly institutional culture announced by the new American Deputy Director General, Beth Bechtold. There's a picture of her in the bottom of the screen. She herself came to FAO with close historical ties with CropLife member Corteva, formerly Dow and DuPont. So this revolving door is spinning, and we are seeing presidents and CEOs from the world's biggest pesticide companies moving in and out of FAO. What we are really witnessing is the replacement of the UN's traditional multilateral decision-making processes towards one of multi-stakeholderism, or what some might say is stakeholder capitalism, that is, in which corporations are not just having seats at the table, but are setting the table and are really controlling the conversation. Meanwhile, former senior FAO staff have revealed what was going on behind closed doors at the FAO. Backroom deals were taking place between the US and China, centered around a shared economic agenda to use FAO to expand the uptake of pesticides and GMOs, especially pushing these products into sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. And this is indeed what we are seeing. But now we know why. In response, PAN and our coalition partners have organized a global campaign urging FAO to reverse its plans to enter into this toxic alliance with CropLife International. And we hope you will join us. You can do so by going to the No Toxic Alliance site there. Meanwhile, over at the UN Committee on Food Security, I'll give you a bit of an update on what's been happening there. So the CFS, a few years ago, the CFS requested its high-level panel of experts to research and produce a report on agroecology. The United States insisted at the time that the scope of the report be expanded to include other innovative approaches, such as biotech and other things. After a couple years of work, the panel published its findings in 2019. A key message was that clearly food system transformation is needed, and that for this to happen, progress must be made towards a number of things: realization of the right to food, gender equity, land rights, recognition of indigenous knowledge, stricter regulation of chemicals and the promotion of ecological alternatives, and serious efforts to address the power imbalances in the food system and conflicts of interest. The panel also took a step back and looked at all the different approaches, these so-called innovative approaches that it had assessed, and it categorized them into two broad groups. One, the transformative approaches that it said were best exemplified by agroecology, and then a set of incrementalist approaches, such as the biotech or the sustainable intensification, these that tended to focus on narrow outcomes like yield without touching the broader structural problems. And these were deemed to be, of course, less likely to contribute to the system transformation that is needed. The CFS then undertook what's called a policy convergence process. And this is a political process in which policy recommendations based on the report are negotiated, sentence by sentence, among governments and stakeholders. So the process for this, negotiations basically took place over Zoom, which was very problematic, were dominated by a few countries that were pushing their corporate industrial ag agenda. Participation of delegates from the global South was seriously hampered by limited resources, limited staff, and internet connection problems. Nevertheless, there was a very strong effort by the civil society mechanism, PAN included, and especially Senegal as like the champion country to highlight the critical role of agroecology in transforming food systems, which was ultimately what this whole report was supposed to be about. Also a strong effort by the CSM, arguing that the realization of the right to food, which is acknowledged by the FAO, also requires upholding the rights of women, peasants, and indigenous peoples. Well, with the strong imbalances of power in this kind of highly problematic Zoom negotiation process, the key messages were ultimately quite watered down, weakened by conditional language at every step of the way. Things like, well, agroecology as appropriate, dependent on context, and so on. Concerningly, that transformative nature of agroecology that was highlighted in the panel report was completely ignored. And this phrase "and other innovative approaches" was constantly inserted, making recommendations mostly meaningless. Still, there are some bits of that report, of the recommendations, that can be useful in our advocacy efforts, as there was nevertheless mention of the right to food and these other addressing barriers to equity, addressing conflicts of interest, and so on. So we will have to go to these recommendations, go back to the original report, find them, and use them very strategically. In terms of pesticides, just a little glimpse for you of the big fight we had over pesticides. We were trying to uplift the message that there should be, as a priority, reduction in the use of and reliance on chemical pesticides. However, the US delegate rejected any language calling for reduction in pesticide use. He even declared that, well, sometimes we need to increase pesticide use, so we really can't go along with anything about decreasing pesticide use, despite all the evidence from around the world of the human health and environmental and ecosystem harms. Instead, the US was able to insert language to optimize pesticide use, which had no basis in the report and actually contradicts UN and internationally agreed guidelines on pesticides. There were also reductions in some of the language around inserting risk instead of harms, and so on. There are some places, there are some bits that are good to some degree. Language that talked about promoting agroecological alternatives to chemical pesticides, removing highly hazardous pesticides. But all too often, this phrase "and other innovative approaches" was inserted, which provides kind of a Trojan horse to bring in GMOs, for example. At the end of the day, PAN joined the CSM, Civil Society Mechanism, in issuing a declaration that criticized the CFS for failing to clearly articulate the connections between the right to food and other people's rights, for caving into US insistence on optimizing pesticides, and undermining countries' efforts to transition wholly to agroecology. But as the document has now been finalized, perhaps it will be up to some to make the best use of the better elements. But what's important is that we keep our eyes on, as Dr. Chito was saying, building our movement's power. So in closing, I would like to invite you to join us in our campaigns to stop the toxic alliance, challenge the corporate agenda in all UN spaces, demand that it is accountable to the people, support the UN Environment Assembly resolution that is up for consideration now to replace highly hazardous pesticides with agroecology, and advance agroecology goals in these other UN spaces. So here are some specific actions you can take. Join PAN, learn more about these issues, sign our petitions, speak up and demand change, and ultimately keep coming together as we continue to build agroecological solutions from the ground up. Thank you.
Thanks, Masha. That was very good the overview of what's happening at the global level. And it's really good that you started with some positive changes that are happening at the provincial level, the national level, and even at the sub-regional level. ECOWAS, I think, was amazing. And I think also Mexico, Spain, all the wonderful things that is happening all over, where people are thinking about changing. And then we have the global scenario and the global policy arena where, in fact, I feel like maybe we're losing a bit of ground, but the struggle goes on. And I think what you said at the end, we need to build the movement. So thank you very much, Masha, and for that. And I'm going to open the webinar for questions or any comments for a short while. Yes, the floor is open for questions. I don't see any questions in the question and answer box. Anything from the chat? No. Anyone raising their hands? Sometimes I miss that. Okay, so we'll come back. We still have a bit of time. At the end of the time, at the end of this sharing, we will also have some time to discuss our action plans and other aspects. So what we will do now is we will move on to a sharing on agroecology best practices. And, I always get very excited and, inspired by the stories on the ground about changes that are happening. So the first speaker is from India, Jay Kumar, who is the director of Tunnel, director of PAN India, as well as a good friend of PAN, but also a good friend of me and of the movement of small food producers. So Jayan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Saru. Even though in the time limiting with technology and the whole pandemic, I'm happy that we are able to move with this side event, talking to the world about the issues. I think I was having a look at the Indian context on agroecology, and we found even though the agroecology, in a sense of what we call the natural farming, was in India much earlier. And in fact, right from 1940s, India was talking, the farmers of India was talking about policy prescriptions, and academic case studies were there on organic farming or agroecology or natural farming. But in a sense, Sri Bhaskar Save, who was known as the Gandhi of natural farming. He's coming from the same region of Mahatma Gandhi's birthplace. And he was leading a lot of farmer sensitization move and building farmers towards natural farming, followed by Nammalwar from Tamil Nadu, who could actually mobilize a large number of farmers towards organic farming and agroecological practices, with the larger in the context of what Chito outlined as what you call an people-led agroecology, and what we work on the food system. We have a large number of examples in India led by great leaders, movements like Tamil Nadu Women's Movement, APVU from Andhra Pradesh. We have many socially oriented leadership across India from almost all the states, which is pushing the idea of agroecology and people-led agroecology. What I thought of sharing with you today is a small case study which Marcia was sharing in the agroecology work group. One of the presentations from India was the old lady from Attapadi, Agali in Kerala, who spoke about her work. And I thought I should take this as more of a, it perfectly fits into the framework defined by Dr. Chito on what is the people-led agroecology work. And this was actually very interestingly, this was the initiative by the government. We have a Scheduled Tribe Development Department, which is committed for building indigenous people's well-being and developing them into, or mainstream them more into the current society. In fact, we have a huge history of poverty and malnutrition and a whole bunch of allied issues in this area known as Agali. And the department, along with TANL and few other government departments, started this whole project called Agroecological Intervention for Nutrition of Tribal Families in Attapadi. We are quite happy that in a very small period, with a very small trigger money, it is actually what, again, you see when the people take the lead, money disappears. It is not money which drives the program. It is what the people which drives the program. So I'm so happy to see the people in Attapadi, especially the tribal communities, they're driving together with a collective leadership of all the, I mean, they took the leadership of civil society, they took the leadership from the government, and they were able to devise and move the movement forward. And in a short period of about 3 months, they could bring fallow land, which was kept fallow for more than 30 years, 3 decades, back to farming. And it was quite interesting that what we started in 3 years back with 500 acres of land in the first year has now become more than 2,000-acre farming by roughly 2,000 families, which is a considerable number, mostly multi-cropping agroecology practice. And it is quite interesting. And in this experience, what we see in Kerala is that farming as an ecosystem service. We talk a lot about ecosystem services in the global policy arenas, and here the farmers came together. They started farming in the landscape, and when they started farming in the landscape, their traditional issues of loss of crops due to climate change, torrential rains, or sudden change in temperatures, or even foraging by wildlife, they had a whole series of problems which kept the land under fallow. And when the people started coming, and the government put a small trigger money for supporting the farmers to bring back the land from in a what do you call, in a unused condition, to till them, to clear the area and bring it back to farming. And what we see was when, again, and it is quite interesting to see when the people started doing it, it became more of a fun. Like it became hide and seek with elephants. It is not, they are not angry with elephants. They were very conscious. This is what makes this whole community quite different from the rest of the communities. Like they were saying, when the elephants came to eat the millets which they grew, the response from the farmers was not a violent retort against the wild animals. They were saying that poor fellows, they don't have good forests, and all the old forests are gone. The food in the forest is bad. So let us give them a little bit, and we will manage. We will manage our food because when the world is hungry, the animals are hungry. We can't be eating all the food. And it's a great philosophy of agroecology, where you bring these communities together, in which, in a very deep ecological sense, the animal community and the people community. So it was quite interesting to see this fun and music and play in agroecology practice around and in a sizable area of over 2,000 acres now. And quite interesting to see again, like the major focus is food, and the youth and the women are leading the whole program. Like it is literally directed by the senior women farmers in terms of how they used to do farming and what crops they do and how they mix crops and which is the time for harvesting, which is the time for sowing, and the youth in a huge line. In one sense, in this community, we are also seeing how pandemic has become a helping situation, like because all the things are closed down, the schools, the major institutions were closed. So most of the children are back in the families, the people have nothing to do, they can't go out, they are shut down or locked down with high incidence of diseases or the COVID-19 cases reported. So they all moved back into the land, and when they started working on the land. And in a sense, it is also important to note here, many other communities were unable to do it because they don't have the land. And this is a community which was fortunate, and also thanks to interventions from the state government, they could keep their land as their or the indigenous community land. And there is a huge effort of an inspiring leadership of the women in the communities coming forward and taking this forward. And what we are seeing is over the last 2 years, there was tons of like close to around 65 to 70 tons of food was produced. A very small percentage they sold in the local market, especially groundnuts and few crops, which in a mix of crop they have the groundnuts and some of the peas and red gram. It is all for bringing money for them, so they sell it easily. Whereas millets, rice, and a variety of other crops, including pumpkins and large number of vegetables, are for consumption of the families and the communities. And also there is a serious amount of sharing in the community. So there are people who couldn't farm, and the food is shared by the neighbors or the other families in the community. So it has become to sum it up in a sense, I think we are seeing a huge revival of agrobiodiversity conservation. They have over 200 different crops in their diet, in the basket of food they eat, and they're quite happy about the taste. The indigenous tastes are back because they are able to taste their own favorite food, and especially millets, not much of white rice and wheat, as Saru was earlier saying, like the public distribution systems and the corporate agendas provide only rice and wheat. And here you have a minimum of 18 to 19 crops farmed by the farmers in their small area of land in many places, like 1 to 2 acres of land. And that produces round the year kind of supply of food for them. And it has also triggered a lot more of movement building in the communities. Like they come together, they're working together, they put up small fences to scare away the animals when the foraging became very serious. At the same time, they're also sharing their crop with animals. So it is a kind of a learning and working together and living, and a true ecosystem movement, which we see also as an agroecology movement. Thanks, Saru. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Jayan. Thank you very much. I worry about Jayan because he's such a narrator. One time we gave him half an hour to talk about the struggle of endosulfan. And he, I think, took about 2.5 hours to talk about the struggle, and none of us stopped him because it was so interesting. So thank you, Jayan, for keeping it short. Nasra, before I move to you, there are some questions which I thought was quite interesting, and There's a question for Masha about how useful is the CSM policy recommendations on agroecology for policy advocacy, and if it has been watered down, and the other fact that it's voluntary. What how do we use this, and how do we manage this? And then there's a question in the question and answer, which was answered, but I thought was quite good. The question was, agroecology seems to be applicable among landowners, but not among tenants. Please comment. So that's from Rhoda, and then I think there's another one, which is an open question about, is there a mechanism to share the best examples of agroecology-based local national governance for potential replications? So how CSOs would be able to facilitate the replications, development framework relative to functional engagement with local governments, especially if local governments don't know the potentials of upskilling of agroecology and organic farming. And this is from Vic. So I'll open the forum for a short while for the responses from the speakers. Thank you. Masha, you?
Yeah, I can tackle that first one as it was addressed to me. Well, as you heard from my presentation, and as you gathered, indeed, the UN, the CFS policy recommendations on agroecology were quite watered down and overall very disappointing, in part because every time they mentioned, invest in agroecological, they would add and other innovative approaches. So kind of meaningless at the end of the day. But as I mentioned, I think it is worthwhile to download the report, and my colleague Simone put the link in the chat. It's worthwhile to download those policy recommendations and also the original high-level panel report. It's a bit of a read. It's not too long, but it is substantial. But the policy recommendations are not too many pages. And there are mentions throughout of useful mentions of, as I said, the right to food, the importance of the realization of the right to food, or addressing structural barriers to equity, lifting up, recognizing local and indigenous knowledge. So it's just that they're not framed as strong as we would like them to be, but they're there. So I think what we can do, given we can't make it better, it's finished, it is what it is, we fought the fight. We can still go through and very strategically pull out the parts that still have some value, and that can be used in our own local advocacy, in our national advocacy. I was rereading it, and there was a bit about protecting farmers from price volatility, and protecting or supporting farmers' organizations. In many countries, there's tremendous oppression and abuse of farmers just for organizing. So, of course, it depends on what one's relationship is and the power you have as a movement on the ground. But these can be useful to point to and say, and if there may be more accountability of local governments and municipal or provincial governments to say, well, even if something is going not so well at the global or the national level, look, this has been recognized as something very important to do. So we can use it strategically to bolster our local campaigns, our provincial or national campaigns. I would suggest that.
Thanks, Masha. I think that's useful to see how we can use those examples and recommendations. But also, I think it will expose them, expose the UN in terms of corporate capture. It's so clear that it's not just the UN FSS, but it's also FAO. And we can see that it's very systematic, and it's same thing is happening in the WHO because we are not following it so closely, but it's been happening also in the WHO. And I wonder what's happening in the UNEP, whether that is also happening at that level. Anyway, thank you very much for that response, and I'll pass on to Dr. Chito.
Yes, first I would like to respond to the question of Roda Dalang, as he was asking if agroecology only seem to be applicable for landowners but not to tenants. But you might be referring, or people who are referring to the old definition or context of agroecology, because agroecology has started more than 30 years ago by Miguel Alceri. It was only lately that we have the it's clearer to see agroecology in our context to be applicable or useful using the 4 dimensions I have mentioned. I think that's the best guide. Looking at the 4 dimensions and look at the components if they're being addressed. Political dimension is clear to us. Even as I mentioned, the FAO doesn't have a political dimension in agroecology. So that the political dimension would make farmers, including landless and tenants, that and food producers, that we should they should own the land or the land that they are cultivating. They should be asserting their rights, including rights against repression by political process. That's the total rights of people, farmers, and fighting also corporate interests. And so I said it is not only for agroecology, not only for the landowners. We have to look at, as I said, didn't work on agroecology. It's the first one that has integrated and made it clearly on the political dimension, the 4 dimensions. If you read that 4 dimensions, then if you address all components or dimensions, then more or less you're okay. Otherwise, people are using the old definitions of agroecology. Then this agroecology can even be co-opted by corporations. So you have to be careful. It's not all agroecology as we are using in this Zoom conference. It's people-led agroecology and use of movements, movement building. So that's the interest of people. The hungry and the poor should be given priority attention and given more weight than anything else. With respect to the point of Big Tagupa, I would say that I don't want to address the or answer the question directly and as best examples, because our experience is that different situations have different contexts, and therefore it requires different approaches and combinations of approaches. So in that case, we have to look at, as I said, still you look at frameworks, you analyze the problem, and you see what should be the activities to attain justice and equity, the broader societal objectives, feeding the poor and hungry, social equity, environmental sustainability, enough income for people to support all the needs of the family are important thing. Now, the other dimension mentioned by Vic Tagupa is that how to relate maybe with local government who doesn't even know how the potentials of territorial upscaling and upscaling agroecology. Actually, conversion to agroecology also is a process. It's not only an overnight thing, and therefore, what is more important is the readiness of groups like us to engage them and make the necessary processes of discussion and exchange of ideas and influencing plans in order to put in place activities and policies in response to the needs of for social justice and equity. I think I'm only asking them in broader strokes because, as I said, I don't believe in best examples because of the uniqueness of every situation, different combinations of elements. Thank you very much. Thank you, Saro.
Yeah, thanks, Chito, for that. And the next speaker will be Nasra Habib, and she's also from Pakistan and an old friend. We've been working together on these issues for many years. We started with looking at women in agriculture, feminism, and building rural women's movements. And then of course, there was a question of, you want to get rid of pesticides, you want to make changes, you want to transform food systems, then what are we talking about? Where are we going? What is the directions? And I think it's agroecology. So Nasra, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Sarobas. First of all, I want to say that I don't speak at Jan's speed, so I decided to record a video. So the video is, I think, with you. So then after the video, I would be here to answer the questions, if any. Hi everyone. Today I'll be sharing a bit of our work on agroecology. Forge Society for People's Education, in collaboration with Organica Pakistan, has taken a multi-pronged approach of building a movement on agroecology. We started working with men and women farmers, but then after some time we learned that it was not enough to work just with the farmers, as there was no ready market for their produce. So we redesigned our campaign, and home gardeners, small farmers, schools, colleges, universities, and urban consumers were also made part of our action-led campaign. A campaign titled 1,000 Organic Edible Urban Gardens was also launched. The gardeners are, as part of the campaign, they are also given orientation, hands-on guidance, and where seeds, and they are also trained to make their own natural inputs. To support home gardeners with tried and tested technical advice, our YouTube channel titled Nasira Habib has also been set up, which has currently around 50 videos to show. And then a special attention has also been paid to groom and educate children whom we think as the future leaders in agroecology. So they need to be given a very special attention. To do the work in a systematic way, school curriculum has also been developed so that they get a very well-rounded education about agroecology. In this work, we feel that information is required through publications. So there are a number of publications which are on the topics which are required to grow food ecologically. The latest book which we are about to launch is a handbook for children on gardening. So to bring all the stakeholders, especially gardeners, to a platform where they can exchange ideas and they can exchange their produce also. Various social media groups have been established, and as a result, a vibrant community has already emerged This approach, which is very integrated, has helped us get much more tangible results and much more interest in agroecology in villages and in urban centers.
Thanks, thanks, Nazra. It gives us a good overview of what's happening on the ground in Punjab and Pakistan, and how you are also spreading the message to the whole nation. And I know your strength has also been with children. The building the school curriculum, and building having schools, and having organic or agroecology as part of the curriculum, when they're learning it as a biology or life sciences. I think that's been very quite good. So we have Jayan, and I think Jayan's presentation was with the tribal and how they were able to I guess rehabilitate the land that they owned, and then they also did agroecology, regenerative agriculture, getting the soil and the seeds and local seeds, to germinate and to grow them for their food security and food sovereignty. So I'm opening the floor. I mean, if there are any questions, and if you have any suggestions in terms of upscaling and upskilling, Jayan and Nazra, that'll be great if we can have a quick response. And then we have a video. After this, we'll have a video from Africa, and then we'll have another session of developing our recommendations to the GPS. Nazra and Jayan? Are there any questions? Or maybe you can start with how we could, upskill and look at skilling.
Who is going to answer that? Can we also speak later? Jayan, I
No,
think you are
it was a
Jayan.
question. I just also putting it to Jayan and Nazra about upskilling and upskilling. Okay. The question from Vic, which I thought was quite interesting. Okay, of course, he talked about how do we talk to governments, but also in your experience, how do you do this massive outreach that Tunnel and Coach has been doing?
Should I say something?
Yes, please.
Yeah. See, in addition to our work with farmers, we've been working with women farmers especially for a long time now. But we thought that that work was very specific to that area, and we need to take the message across to other sections of society also, especially to build a market also for the farmers, because if there is so much of effort put in, and then in the end there is no market and there is no awareness. So what we have been doing lately is that we are in conversation. We are in communication with different universities in Punjab, and we are signing MOUs with the universities to train their students in agroecology. And to build, like one university, they have signed an MOU with us, and they, for example, they wanted to link our YouTube channel to their university website. And then there are hands-on trainings. So so my hope, a lot of hope is from the youth. So I feel that children and youth, if we are working with them, so there is a very big opportunity that they become future leaders. So we are in touch with a number of universities, and then we are working closely with some NGOs also, working on education, who are working like with 500 schools, government schools. So they are adding a component on agroecology. I mean, we are taking some science concepts like the ecology, the habitat, and the microorganisms. I mean, taking from the curriculum itself, but giving it a very different angle, and then teaching children hands-on. So building gardens in schools. So in that process, we are basically teaching teachers, training teachers, and working with children. So we are hoping, and the kind of response we are getting is very, very positive. So we are hoping that we would be able to build a very strong network, which would eventually take shape of a movement. And then the urban consumers also, because if there is a demand from urban consumers, then there is obviously there is an interest in farmers, especially in small farmers, and to grow agroecologically. So I feel that we need to take a multi-pronged approach, and our focus these days is spreading our wings all over the country and scale up. And I mean, from urban people, we are getting a very good response from women, especially. And they are into building gardens, they are into they are very interested now to send their children to alternative education. So it's like upscaling for us is working with farmers, men and women, then working with consumers in the big cities, then very systematically working with universities, with schools, with colleges. So for us, that is.
Okay, thank you, Nazra. Jane, anything to share?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, sir. I think the approach which we are seeing, or which is evolving from this work, is that two. One, there was a need for the tribal youth in terms of creating sustainable livelihoods, and it's also linked with a little bit of small machines in farming sector, so that they could actually magnify their efforts and get a little more income than the traditional manpower, and they don't need to really slog. So we are looking at sustainable livelihood as an option. We are also working with an idea of youth fellowship, which is an actually agroecology youth incubation, so that if we can give youth a small fellowship for a 6-month period,
Then I think you are, yeah. We'll come back to you, Jen, because I think something's wrong with your internet connection. Yeah, because you're frozen. Okay, now let's move on. I think we have 2 more videos. I've been told that there's a video from Africa and also from the US. So maybe we can Okay, Jen, you want to finish?
Yeah, I just want to finish. We are creating what we call a millet processing center, and so that the processed millet can be sold to urban locations. And what we call it is a project foodscape, so that we can advance the communities with small money for starting the farming, and they return back that small money. We look at the total yield they will get out of their field is around 60 to 80,000 Indian rupees, and they take about 5 to 10,000 rupees as an advance from somebody. They can always easily give that advance and still have enough food for the community to eat for the whole year. So that is, we are creating this foodscape, creating a sustainable livelihood option, creating a fellowship program with a broad umbrella of Agroecology Resource Center, which is a youth incubation program, and trying to find resources for running this. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Jain. Amazing work on the ground, both in India and India and Pakistan. So really good way that we are moving in terms of spreading and amplifying in terms of agroecology. So now we have 2 videos. Yeah, thank you.
Non yo ku Rosaline, place segbejiton pa mi defi. Kominu jija. Non vi attention do pojendo. Era wo go jo vile do mi. Nde men den so ku ya. Nde wo ku ya fa ton kwanta bi ko me mo me. Peta mi ton emi do yo, mi to ben coopératif. Akwe gba no ji to e we so yen lo. Kletio eta we. Eta wo nka dondo eta tonji din. Eta tonji dondo ndo avokan. Ndo aizin. Ndo gbade, ndo soja, do eta tonji din. Bole do kadugbo. Aka do afokan bo na fokan na yan fokan kan jinu we nele wa to bo desi. Bo dren. Suko e de canton le an dren do weme. Te amo tembo font ikungba ona ado ene we so do kode ya. Mo no pe bo do koton ene afokan to na di do po we. Afokan cream ton mi o si fo we yo de me an. For the mesuko tan de we wo aduade po akwa nto bo diko bo do nu ko na yo an le san le je kwen ko di do kwen ji we go bo afokan na mo tembo do ero to na mo tembo sin be be we sun ke kan di do ma ja so waji we de kre na ikun gban ni ere do aikun gban de mi mo do njere ekun aikun gban de bo mi do nu bara do ko na be do si sa o ekun mo mi de so no na suko ho na ikungba yo mi de so no do ko no mi so bara de do ko na e wa so ma ikungba e ro kanji we no si ma de apere ton yo o mi o ton do dati e be no do le do yo mi ko ne do bodo gude so an do no be ale jiro ba le ai ho ahi me so da ibo e no avari e vari yo ene mi no asa dagbe mo de me yo e we so bon poda so do dagbe de te apasa te kanji wọ́n ní so tagbade so de mi afika so khen nu mi an so jinukun lo jadurugbe o novo amo tete o te fine din mi te ne din mi khen din mi asin attaque din mi clear ogbe din mi ba din mi an ri e do problem de nu clear din bo nu ye din yege nu bara de e we so bo tinukun le po mi te po popo do mi de no hona.
Hi, my name is Patty Naylor. I am a farmer in Iowa, which is in the central part of the United States, considered the Corn Belt. It was 7 years ago that my husband and I made the decision to transition our farm to organic. It was this orchard that I'm standing in right now that helped make that decision. So it was with the idea of agroecology and the science of ecology that really helped us to make the decision that certified organic was the way to go. I'd like to take you on a tour of our farm, and hold on. This is one of the new orchards that we planted 6.5 years ago. To be organic and agroecological, we do a number of things to combat the insect pressures that we have. We do monitoring. We do targeted spraying with natural products such as neem oil and kaolin clay to attract pollinators. We have medicinal and culinary herbs planted amongst the trees, and we have you can see in the distance there is a prairie section that has lots of flowers in there during most of the year. Here we are in the orchard that we planted just this past spring. It's more than double the size of the two orchards that we planted 6.5 years ago. I also planted strawberries and also some garden vegetables between the trees in the space that we have. You can see there in the distance, that line of trees is our farmstead. The apple orchard that I was standing in earlier is on the other side of that. And across the way, right there, is the cornfield that my husband harvested just the last couple of days. It's an organic cornfield. So we've added oats and hay to the soybean and corn rotations. We also use cover crops that both provide weed control and provide nitrogen. We're surrounded by friends and neighbors who grow almost exclusively genetically engineered corn and soybeans. And it's the policies that we have, including free trade agreements, that really lock them into that mode of production. And that's why agroecology is so important. It has that political policy aspect to it that we really need to include.
Thank you. Oh, that was wonderful. Both the videos, both were women, and and both are farmers, organic farmers. And thank you, for sharing that video with us. Now, we are going to the next part of our session. Now, we are looking at recommendations, policy suggestions, and campaigns, and where we want to go to advance agroecology and food sovereignty within food sovereignty. So Anu, you will help me to facilitate this. Yeah. So these are the what you call the action points that we have picked up from the speakers. And so one, I think this was from the four speakers. One was stop the toxic alliance between FAO and CropLife, challenge multi-stakeholderism at the CFS and in all UN spaces, because it's not fair. It's not just. It's still biased towards the corporations. So I think that's the reality we're seeing in terms of multi-stakeholder processes. Reject the corporatist UN FSS and its output, such as the science policy interface. Support the UN, and well, the UNIA resolution is still a CSO. It's a PAN resolution that we are trying to push in the UNIA. So maybe we just reword that a little bit so that it's clearer. So support the PAN resolution and forward it in the UNIA 5.2, I think, or just as a, yeah, support the PAN resolution on the phase out of HHPs and support agroecology in UNIA, in the UNIA process. Yeah. Great, thanks. The UNIA process. Thank you. So advance agroecology goals in the UN Convention on Biodiversity, demand agroecology solutions at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and keep building AE solutions at local, provincial, national, and regional levels. And then we have build solidarity markets, local markets, consumer supported community-supported markets, and build coalitions and movements on agroecology within the framework of food sovereignty.
Saro, can I interrupt you a little bit? The
Yes,
building
can I read?
Okay,
Tito, I'll come back to you. No problem. I'm going to open it up. We can change, add, no problem. Then we have build coalitions and movements, and then mobilize outreach youth consumers for agroecology. Okay, so now I open it for any additions and suggestions.
Saro, can I speak now?
Yes,
I did not
please.
raise my hand.
Yes.
The build
Yes.
coalitions and movements, I think we add also onto that line, organize, empower farmers in addition to this building coalitions and movements. The very foundation is organizing farmers, organize, empower them, because these are important foundations. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's very important to have organizing, empowering farmers, build coalitions and movements as part of this. So yeah.
Sorry,
Anybody else?
can I add some more? I forgot to mention. Is it okay, Saro?
Please go ahead. Go ahead. No problem. Yes.
Because the way I observe is that traditionally many organizations, even up to now, many NGOs, the service areas that they work with are the same areas after 5 years, after 10 years. So maybe we must design a form of expanding our rates as organizations, NGOs as development workers should expand their partners, or especially farmer partners and consumer partners, because we cannot work without expansion, because as I said, corporations are so powerful. So expanding our linkages and membership is so important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tito. I think that's important. Anybody else?
Saru, can I come in?
Yes, Jan.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think in that last idea of mobilize outreach youth, I was more focusing on sustainable rural livelihoods. If you see, because there is not enough sustainable rural livelihoods as an income source, the youth and especially young women and men are really forced for migration to urban areas. So I think it is important for this rural livelihood as an, and linked with agroecology. And we understand that agroecology has immense potential of giving jobs in rural areas.
Thanks for the addition. Anybody else?
I could add a point.
Yes, please, Masha.
I'm not quite sure how to phrase it, but in the case, this was mentioned a bit in the chat. Simone added this in the chat. But in the case of Mexico, when they first began their transition under the new administration, they also had this presidential decree to ban glyphosate and to also stop the import of GMO seeds. And that immediately elicited this backlash, of course, from the corporates, from the industry. And the US companies went to the US Trade Office and asked the US Trade Office to intervene. I think a similar thing happened with Thailand some years ago when Thailand attempted to phase out paraquat and some other chemicals. The US Trade Office intervened, or the corporations intervened. Yeah. So what I'm looking for is, in this case with Mexico, our colleagues asked us for some solidarity, and we mobilized a big sign-on letter from civil society groups and the public in the US to pressure our own government to stop interfering with Mexico's sovereign right. So there's something there about the solidarity, the international solidarity, and showing up for each other in cases where, maybe, well, since I'm based here in the US, this is happening a lot, where our government is interfering and intervening and wreaking havoc and causing damage in other countries. So we can be allies or accomplices by pressuring our government to stop interfering in this case. But I think there's maybe a more general point about solidarity and supporting each other's movements. Whether, when some communities are being harassed or oppressed by, in their own country, perhaps by another government, we also need to bring our voices to support the farmers, the workers, the peasants, the indigenous peoples. For sure, here in the US, these oppressions are happening as well. So yes, I think you captured it there, Arnold, international solidarity.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
ഞാനിപ്പോഴും
Thanks, Masha.
വെബിനാറിന്റെ നടുവിലുള്ളത് ഒന്ന് അർജുനാണ് നിങ്ങൾ എഴുതി എനിക്ക് അയച്ചിരുന്നു ഞാനങ്ങ് ഫോർവേഡ്
Diane, I think you have to mute yourself. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else?
Me, if you can.
Dr. Chito is raising his hand.
Yes, Dr. Chito.
I think one of the challenges also of agroecology is legitimizing it, because the dominant influence of corporations in the academy and policymakers, so that we need to expand also or reach out to academic scientists, because we need to expand the so-called legitimacy, quote unquote, from the context of dominant Malthusian thinking into something of this agroecological thing. We need to reach out to scientists and in the academy so that they can do the other dimension or one activity of agroecology is to do research, documentation, and sharing publication. And also we need to reach out and influence local government, not only local government officials to increase the so-called policy legitimacy, so that we can put in place, this is in line with Victor Gopa's question a while ago, that we can put into policy the agroecology support, as Saru has mentioned, that in Mexico, the national government is trying to has putting into place a policy support for agroecology. So I will reach out to government officials to make policy in support of agroecology is so important also. Thank you.
Thank you, Chito. I think that's very important. And we have two scientists here, you and Masha. So you'll be having a lot of work to get the science community behind us. But it's also, I'm just joking, it's all of our efforts. I think all of us are committed to, talking to farmers, consumers, scientists, academic members and government officials to actually try to transition to a safer world in terms and moving towards agroecology. No problem. Anybody else?
I'll just add on to what Dr. Chito said, that indeed we've had some success with organizing and building alliances with the agroecology academics in the US, in North America, and I've seen the same thing happening in Latin America. But even in this case of the Stop the Toxic Alliance campaign, after 300 organizations signed on to our letter, 300 groups from 60 countries opposing this toxic alliance, as well the academics that we had already been building relationship with organized and sent their own letter with 250 academics signing on to protest this. And in addition, another ally group is some of these few foundations and funders and donor agencies that saw in this case just how egregious an example of conflict of interest this was. So they joined in and sent a letter as well. But I think broadly we can also be building these alliances with other groups like the academics and researchers and even funders, foundations that may have the ear of some of these institutions, or can also get some media attention when they weigh in support of grassroots groups.
The special rapporteur on toxics is quite a long name, but is a special UN special rapporteur on toxics, both looking at chemicals and waste. And he's just coming up, he's just released his report on right to science. And there will be a side event this tonight, and Ben EP will be sharing our CPAM, Citizens Science. But I just wanted to highlight that, there's a lot of information in terms of conflict of interest there. And Switzerland is trying to develop this science policy panel, and we should ensure that there's no conflict of interest. And this will be important for the chemicals and waste discussions when they pull together this science and policy panel. And it will be under UNEP. I think that the responsibility will be UNEP. So we have to kind of also monitor this, that it doesn't go back into corporate control. And I think, Masha, you were involved in the World Bank, what was it called? The evaluation,
Chito mentioned it as well.
Yeah, and you had Paul Tang, who used to be with Monsanto, hiding the fact that he was from, he's from Monsanto, and you were able to reveal that, not expose that. So those are the kind of things also we should do in one hand. The other hand, of course, to develop the links with sympathetic and allies within the scientific and academic community. So I think that's one area that we should also develop as we move forward. Anything else?
Yes, sir. Just to mention that Doc Chito has already asked to be excused because he's attending another meeting.
Okay, like most of us, huh?
Yeah,
we're having this.
And also, these are just notes. What you see on the screen, we have an official documentation that will capture everything.
So we will, expand this to capture all the ideas and put this forward to the Global People's Summit, and that will be consolidated to share with all the movements, CSOs, and the UN, in different parts of the UN. And so, yeah.
Just a question, Saro, maybe Marcia can help answer. Are there key dates in the coming months that we should take note of? Events, meetings, where we can engage for our advocacy on agroecology?
I can mention, I don't have the exact dates in mind, but the UN Convention on Biodiversity is going through its process. There's an open-ended working group meeting coming up. It's all part of their building what they call the post-2020 framework on biodiversity that will be finally discussed in plenary at the Conference of the Parties of the CBD in Kunming, China, sometime early next year. Our colleagues at PAN UK, I previously had some involvement. PAN UK is very involved now, and what they are working on is the targets around both reducing pesticide use and also promoting increasing adoption of agroecological approaches. So that will be a date, a moment to be watching and engaging as well. I don't have the dates here, but we can look at it before the final moments. But the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is, of course, upon us. And so I imagine will be some opportunities there to raise these issues. The other thing I wanted to add, when you mentioned, Sarah, about watching out for in the context of the UN Special Rapporteur on Toxics and the right to science, and kind of exposing some of these false solutions coming out of the UNFSS, there is this science policy interface, this SPI. We need to be watching that very carefully. It seems there is this power move, right? The whole UNFSS is a power move in itself to try to pull the conversations out of the CFS as kind of flawed and compromised the process that has become. The CFS still has the structure for a civil society mechanism for, we have a seat where we can be making interventions in real time. The UNFSS, part of connected to the World Economic Forum, it has no accountability, no mechanisms at all. So this new social science policy interface seems to be something they are trying to put forward as a way to, again, draw resources and attention and power out of the high-level panel of experts, which at least, again, has some kind of open consultative process. So it's all going undercover, in this very opaque, not accountable process. In addition, what we've heard is there's been some kind of agroecology coalition that is being developed in the UNFSS. It sounds nice, and there's some actors that are very excited about agroecology, but again, who are they accountable to? There's no accountability mechanisms. There's no transparency mechanisms. So that is another thing we need to be watching. Who is speaking for whom in this so-called agroecology coalition? The whole concept, our whole movement's built around agroecology. This is susceptible to co-optation. We've been seeing this in past years of, even Monsanto, now Bayer, has some webpage on agroecology. So we need to be just exposing these false claims to agroecology and the lack of accountability in some of these mechanisms that are and new initiatives that are being set up, as well as the language, like, we're hearing about nature-based solutions, nature positive solutions. These are all these kind of false solutions that are being put forward with green window dressing, just to continue the same old corporate solutions that we've been dealing with all these years.
Thanks, Marsha. Can we now look at the key upcoming meetings? Can you put the UNIA 5.2? It'll be next February, late February, early March. And that's when we are hoping to get governments to think about doing a resolution. We're already working now to do a resolution on highly hazardous pesticides and promoting agroecology. So the phase out of highly hazardous pesticides and replacing them with agroecology. So we're just keeping our fingers crossed that some governments will pick it up and champion it in the UNIA 5.2. Let's see. Anything else before we move on? Okay, so if there are no further inputs and additions and suggestions, I'm just checking out. Okay, yeah, there's no more additions.
There may be, there may be some on, as you mentioned, the human rights, like ECOSOC. I'm not following it exactly closely, but I know there's a Human Rights Council meeting, I think today, in fact, there was.
Yeah.
But that will be leading to more around this rights to science and Marcos's work. So yeah, we may want to get that into our calendar. Looking further ahead as a bigger strategy for PAN and our movement, how to engage on the human rights angles.
Yes, for sure. That's important. Yeah. Okay. So I'll close this session. But before we close, we would like to take a photo of to do a photo op. So I just want to say thank you to all the participants, the co-organizers in terms of PAN-AP, MASIPAG, and PAN North America. I think it's been a very rich discussions in terms of agroecology. We started at the policy level. We looked at what countries are doing at the different levels, region, national, and even at the province level, and the real work on the ground, sharing. We had 4 wonderful and inspirational talks and sharing through videos. So really, really fantastic. So Thank you very much, everyone. And let's work together to make agroecology a reality. Thank you. So can you all switch on your videos? Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Someone taking a screenshot, or should I do it?
I can do it, Arnold. Just
Okay. Thanks, Ilang.
is everyone ready?
Yes.
Let's wait for the others. I think
Hold on,
they're still
hold
being
on,
promoted.
Ilang, yeah.
Hold on. There are others.
So while waiting, we will send you the documentation of the of our meeting, including especially our action points. Anyway, we have the email addresses now because you registered for the webinar. Thank you again, everyone.
Josephine.
Okay.
Sovatana. Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, Shalik. Yeah, fantastic. Okay.
You will send us the photo?
Yeah.
Surely.
Thank you, everyone.
Along with the
Don't forget to
documentation. Thank you.
Thank closing session of the Global People Summit. All right. I'll put the links in the chat just in case.
Yes, please join us tomorrow.
Tomorrow, the last
That's
day.
our closing for the Global People Summit.
They also have a session tonight.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. We're done.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, everyone.